Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to the Tippie Women's Summit. We'll get started in just another minute, so hold on tight as other people are joining the webinar. Thanks so much. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for attending another event that is part of the Tippie College's Tippie Women's Summit. My name is Barb Thomas, and I'm the Executive Director of Alumni and Constituent Relations here at the Tippie College of Business, and I will be your moderator today. Now, before we begin, we do have a special welcome from the Tippie College's Dean, Amy Christoph Brown. Amy?
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We have put on what I think is just an amazing month of programming around the Tippie Women's Summit. When we used to do this just in person, we were kind of limited to a small group of people in Iowa City. And now that we've been able to do events both in person and virtually, we know that our audience today really spans the country and even the globe. So thank you for being here with us today. I want to say a special thank you to Barb Thomas and all of the folks on her team that have helped put this together, and all of our speakers. We have a terrific set of opportunities in Tippie Women's Summit. If you weren't able to join us for our earlier sessions, they are available on our Tippie YouTube channel, as will this session that Rong is doing today. It will also be available, and we have another one coming up next week. So Barb will tell you more about it, but I just wanted to say a special welcome and thank you to all of our presenters, to all of our organizers, and for all of you for being here. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Amy. Well, I do want to remind everyone that we have one more session that is part of the Tippie Women's Summit, and that will actually be next week. And it's next Friday, same time, noon, and it will be on assembling your power players, how to develop your own personal networks for your own personal as well as your professional growth. Now, this event includes a great diverse set of alumni, and it will be led by our faculty member, Beth Livingston. So in addition, you can just watch the chat. We will place a link to that event in the chat so that you can register. And then once we're done with the Tippie Women's Summit, you will have the opportunity to participate in a number of other webinars that the Tippie College Alumni Office actually coordinates. So we are returning to our career webinar series, and on April 6th, we will present a program on making the most of your performance review. And then on May 25th, our program will be on navigating a career pivot, 5 steps to consider when making a change. Now, each of these programs feature the expertise of the Tippie College's Graduate Management Program's Career Services Office. And they also take place over the noon hour, and we'll include a link in the chat for those events as well. We encourage you to register. So now, before we begin, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. We have enabled the live transcription service offered by Zoom for our hearing impaired guests. Now, if you potentially don't want to see that, now I'm going to check and see if Shannon can make sure that that's going. If you don't want to see it, if you start to see those words, all you have to do is look to the bottom of the your bottom screen and then choose the more or the 3 dots, and then you can choose hide subtitles. But if you'd like those subtitles to actually be larger, just simply go to subtitle settings and you can change that size. Now, all of the captions are auto-generated and they are available only in English. Now, throughout our events, you can submit questions to us through the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your screen. Now, we'll do our best to address your questions today, and we are going to stop at different points in our program to take some of your questions. Now, the other thing I want to remind you is that the chat function works a little bit differently in the webinar platform compared to a regular Zoom meeting. If you click on the chat, you will actually only have two options. You can choose to send a chat to the host and all panelists or to everyone. And so if you have a great resource that you want to share with other participants, make sure that you have selected everyone when you add that information. So now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker today. Rong is an associate professor of management and entrepreneurship and the Pioneer Research Fellow in the Tippie College of Business. Currently, she serves as an associate editor for Psychological Bulletin, a top journal in the field of psychology for publishing high impact, systematic research synthesis and reviews. She's a research expert on the topics of gender and diversity in organizations, personnel selection, career management, and quantitative research methods. Her work has appeared in numerous top-tier academic journals, has been cited over 4,000 times, and has been featured by major media outlets nationally and internationally, including Time and the New York Times. She has concluded 8 grant-funded projects to date that total 1.2 million, serving in either the role of principal investigator or co-principal investigator. And so with that, I will turn our presentation over to Rong Su.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Barb, and welcome everybody to the session. I'm so excited to have you here, and I look forward to sharing with you some insights about the imposter experience that hopefully will be useful and helpful to you or someone you know who are experiencing some of these feelings and thoughts. As Dean Amy Krista Brown has said, I hope you have enjoyed some of the other events in the Tippie Women's Summit this year. And I hope you have a great experience during today's session as well. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to put in the Q&A. Barb will help me monitor the questions, and we will stop at various points during the presentation and also the end of this presentation to address some questions. I will say, however, I used to teach this topic in a 4-hour format. So we have to condense this into 40 minutes, which is challenging. So if we are not able to address all the questions you have today, happy to stay in contact. Feel free to reach out to me after the session today and we can continue the conversation. Okay, with that, let me share my screen and begin our conversation. So before we dive in, I want to quickly explain why the title you see here is much longer than the one that's listed on our events page. So to be honest, I have never been a fan of the term imposter syndrome. And the reason being that, and I will highlight this as we go through the session, is that it's not really a syndrome. By labeling ourselves as imposters, we actually inhibit progress. We actually inhibit possible action steps and strategies we can take to address these experiences of imposter thoughts and feelings. So I would rather conceptualize it as you can see here, the imposter experience. And I will challenge some of the misconceptions about the imposter experience and hopefully establish a renewed understanding of it, and with that help you think about it differently and overcome some barriers to career success. All right, so let's get started. So what is the imposter experience? Here are some statements that describe how people commonly feel or think when they have the imposter experience. In summary, these are thoughts and feelings that people have that discount their accomplishment, their skill, or their disability, rather than attributing their own success and accomplishment to their capability. People who have imposter experience attribute their success and accomplishment to luck or error, and often a signature emotion that's experienced by people who have the imposter experience is a fear of being exposed, the fear of other people, especially those close to them in the workplace, finding out that they're not as competent as others thought they are, and being exposed as a fraud. It has been reported that over 70% of people, in all types of occupations at some point in their career have had imposter experience. So the first thing I want to highlight that is that it is common. I just want to normalize the experience. If you're feeling alone, if you feel like you are struggling by yourself with some of these thoughts and feelings, please know that you're not. Today, just for our session, we have over 500 people registered for that. And that speaks to how common these thoughts and feelings are. And with that knowledge, we can think through how we can address these thoughts and feelings. You probably have seen in popular media a lot of public figures talking about their imposter feelings and thoughts as well. So it's, people have these experiences not because of their incompetence, but in contrast, it is happening more frequently for people who are successful, especially in these high achieving professional settings. But people are just discounting their success, having these irrational beliefs. So for example, I have a quote here from Facebook or Meta platforms, now it is called, CEO Sheryl Sandberg. So she talks about her imposter experience a lot in her book, Lean In. And she said every time she excels, she believes that she has fooled everyone yet again. Here's another quote from the beloved poet, Maya Angelou. She said, I have written 11 books, but each time I think, they are going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. So it is extremely common. It is not something that very few people are struggling with. So one other thing I want to clarify is that it is commonly believed that imposter experience or these imposter feelings and thoughts are more commonly experienced by women and minorities. We do not know for sure. The data, we do not really have data on that. The reason why there is this belief that it's more common, for example, among women, maybe there is the factor of sampling bias. By sampling bias, I'm referring to, the origin of the study or research on imposter experience was focused on high achieving women. And since then, a lot of the studies do focus on, women and especially minorities who are experiencing stereotype threat in those high achieving professional settings. That's why we're seeing more reporting of imposter experience, from women and minorities, just because they're being studied more and they are more likely to report their experience. But that doesn't mean that men do not experience these. some recent research, for example, you can see here, done by some of my collaborators in Belgium, found that gender is actually not significantly associated with imposter tendencies. So what that means is that men and women actually have similar tendencies to have these experiences, and it's not that women have more intense imposter experience than men do. So today, what I'm hoping to do is to challenge some additional existing misconceptions about the imposter experience, and hopefully help us establish a new understanding about this experience, and offer some action steps and strategies that could help. So here is a quick summary of what I'm going to talk about to give you a preview of what to expect. First, the first misconception I'm going to challenge is the imposter experience is not a syndrome. It is situational. I will explain in a minute. Second, the imposter experience is not something that's entirely negative that should be stopped or conquered. I get a lot of questions, for example, how do I stop these thoughts and feelings from coming? The answer is, first of all, probably not. You probably wouldn't be able to stop them from coming. And second, you don't have to, because there are positive effects from the imposter experience as well as the negative effects. But what we need to learn to do is to leverage the positive effects and use this experience and learn to know how to use this experience to motivate us for career success. And third, the imposter experience is not just an individual experience. A lot of people who struggle with imposter thoughts and feelings often think it's an individual experience, especially if you use the language such as I am an imposter. But it is relational. There are a lot of, it's related to interpersonal relationship. I will talk about how can you leverage your interpersonal assets to make this experience better, and how could you help others and serve as an interpersonal resource for other people. Okay, and before I dive in, I just want to quickly acknowledge the general support of my research. So the content we're going to discuss today is based on my research and the research of many others. So I want to acknowledge the generous support from the University of Iowa and from the Tippie College of Business, as well as Women Lead Change. And I want to acknowledge my collaborator, Dr. Christina Lee. She was a PhD student here at Tippie in the management department, and now an assistant professor at the University of Oklahoma. All right, so what do I mean when I say the imposter experience is situational? So let's take a look at the traditional view of the imposter experience. So when someone says that they have the imposter syndrome, they're labeling themselves as an imposter. And a lot of research done in the clinical setting in the early days for the imposter syndrome, rely on this view that some people have higher score on this syndrome and other people have lower score. So Dr. Pauline Clance, she actually has a clinical measure that gives people a score, and you can actually take it on her website. And there is a threshold, right? So there is this threshold. If you're above this threshold, you're likely, you're labeled as an imposter. If you're below this threshold, you're not an imposter. But this view is actually, as I have explained, not very helpful, because what we need to know is not to label ourselves as an imposter. It's not helpful to learn that I am an imposter. It's helpful to learn how can I change this, right? It's so the key point is to really study the pattern of change within the individual, for example, person A, rather than comparing person A to person B, knowing that I'm an imposter, Barb is not an imposter, and compare myself to her. right? So this is exactly what our research found. So what we did 2 studies, as I showed earlier. So in 2018, we did a qualitative study, which means that we interviewed a group of professionals, working professionals, both men and women, about imposter experience. We invite them to share their experience with us. Over time, this is important. We didn't ask them to share one incident, but we invite them to talk about, over time, how does it change for you? What are the incidences and situations that trigger these imposter thoughts and feelings? And we got a lot of great insights. I realized that some of you who are in attendance of this webinar may be participants of the study. And I just want to express my gratitude towards your participation, because that offered us great insights. And in 2019, we conducted another study, a quantitative study supported by the Tippie College Research Excellence Grant. We followed up graduates from business school, both the Tippie College of Business and other business schools around the country. We follow them as they step into their new jobs. We give them repeated surveys in the first 3 months of their new job, and we ask them to tell us their imposter experiencing and feelings. And then we in that study, we try to find out what are the factors that intensifies these thoughts and feelings, and what are the factors that helps make it easier for them. So here are the findings from our study. So first of all, as I have explained, it's not a syndrome. For everyone, it always changes. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. It's important to know that, for example, person A and person B here, they may have different, you can think of as baselines for the tendency to experience imposter syndrome, right? So person A may have a slightly higher baseline on average, and person B have a lower baseline that's, below some threshold. But over time, they both change. And there are times where person A is below the threshold, even lower than person B. And there are times that person B is above the threshold. So it's really important to abandon this label of imposter syndrome and really think about that this is a situational experience that's triggered by some events and in some occasions. So the next important thing to do is to understand, well, what are the triggers, right? What are the situations and events that trigger or prompt these feelings? Well, we found that there are some typical triggers for everybody. So for example, new and unfamiliar role responsibilities is one, especially the reason why we, surveyed business school graduates is because they're stepping into a new job. And that's one of the most frequent trigger for imposter feeling, because you're thrown into an unfamiliar environment. You thought you know everything, now you don't. You take on new responsibilities. Another type of situation that easily triggers this experience is promotion to a managerial role. Many of you may have the experience of that, and come with the new and unfamiliar responsibilities. Often are these feelings. And as imposter experience has been studied in a lot of high achieving professional contexts, such as medicine, law, academia as well for professors. So it's typical for individuals to have these feelings and thoughts in these contexts. The third finding that I want to highlight, and this is really important, is that when we say that I am an imposter, that I have imposter syndrome, it indicates that the experience is the same for everyone. What we found in our research, that it's actually not. Even though a lot of people use this label to describe their experience, the story that people told us during the interviews are very different. And the triggers and the events that prompt people's imposter feelings and thoughts are also very different. So, if you ask me, how do I stop these imposter feelings and thoughts? My answer is probably going to be Well, it depends, because there is not a single cure for everybody. And the reason is because these triggers are really different for everybody. So to really understand your own imposter experience and to find out what is the cure or things you could do, it requires everyone to engage in a self-reflection on the pattern of your own imposter experience and really find out in what situations do you tend to experience imposter feelings the most, and what are the triggers or events that tend to prompt your imposter feeling. This self-reflection is really important because as I said, everybody's experience is unique. And without understanding your pattern of when it happens, why it happens, how do you typically deal with it, we cannot find out what are the effective solutions to this issue, right? So I'd like to think about this as helping yourself develop a roadmap, because once you have done the self-analysis of your pattern of imposter experience and know what to expect, the experience actually get a lot better. This is because the signature emotions that a lot of people experiencing imposter thoughts and feeling are fear and anxiety. And fear and anxiety tend to be the most intense when you are facing uncertainty. So help yourself understand yourself better by analyzing your pattern of imposter thoughts and feelings and developing this roadmap so you can stop yourself. You can either know what to anticipate, and that's going to help, or know where you are in the cycle of this imposter experience and know it's gonna get better, right? All right, so but there's more to that in terms of the situational nature of the imposter experience. In that, hold on. When we look at the baseline, right? So you may have the question, well, what about my baseline? If you're person A, you may say, I still have a higher baseline than person B. I'm still more of an imposter than Barb is. What can I do about that? So here is what we found in our research is that people's baseline actually changes over the course of their career. People can change. I have done some research a few years ago with my colleagues when I was at Purdue University on the faculty, that we show that even stable personality traits like neuroticism can change and can change quite a bit over a short period of time, going through training or intervention. And certainly the baseline for imposter feelings and thoughts can change. Sometimes it changes gradually, as we find out from some of our participants, and sometimes it changes dramatically. So research has shown that in general, organizational level has a small positive correlation with the reduction of imposter tendencies, meaning that you attain higher status, you grow in your confidence, and you gain wisdom, and that's going to help. But sometimes just because of a change in the environment and situation, that's going to introduce a dramatic reduction in the baseline. I will give you an example at the very end of this presentation. But what is the implication of this? I think it's really important to know this because it reminds us we should endorse a growth mindset. Many of you have heard about this. There are a lot of popular business books about this. A growth mindset is just the understanding that we can change. As a human being, we have the capacity to change, in terms of our knowledge, our skills. And this is important because it serves as a reminder that nobody is an imposter forever. You're experiencing this in specific situations. So knowing this, what can we do to change, right? So, it wouldn't be a complete story until I offer you some actually concrete action steps and strategies you can use to make those changes. Of course, it's not going to be comprehensive, but one of the important steps is to have this, to shift the inner conversation we're having with ourselves. I'm going to offer you some specific narrative you can use to shift your inner conversation from a dispositional statement about your imposter experience to a situational statement, and from emotional focused narrative to a problem focused narrative. So what do I mean by that? A lot of people, when they experience the imposter syndrome, the things they say to themselves and the inner conversation they have with themselves is, I am a fraud. Instead of saying that, instead of labeling yourself that I have the imposter syndrome, here is the useful thing to say. I feel like a fraud right now, but this feeling is situational. It's temporary. It's going to change. Most likely it's going to get better. Here is what triggers my imposter thoughts and feelings, and here are the things I can do about them. Similarly, when we are experiencing these imposter thoughts and feelings, a lot of the negative consequences comes with the emotion focused coping strategy that a lot of people use. What I mean by emotion focused coping strategy is that a lot of times we get wrapped up in these feelings. So the narrative that we may be having with ourselves is, I fooled everyone to think that I'm capable, then I really am. I feel awful. I feel scared. I feel anxious. Instead of having that conversation with yourself, learn to shift to a problem-focused coping strategy. Psychology research has constantly show that problem-focused coping is a lot more effective than emotion-focused coping. So instead of, thinking about your feelings and going down this negative cycle, try to say this. Everybody thinks I'm capable of X. I'm not sure I'm capable of X, right? Like maybe I am a bit of an imposter, but what are the growth opportunities here? What are the learning opportunities here? What can I do to take care of this situation? And admit that sometimes we may be falling short. Sometimes, our skills may be falling short, and that's a growth opportunity for us, right? These conversations are not easy. I wish I have a short, quick answer. I wish I can tell you that everybody practice this one sentence. Just say, hey, I've got this. I'm going to increase my confidence. That's going to magically fix everything. It's not. Shifting the inner conversation is a long process, but it does come with rewards, and people can't change, right? If you're interested in reading more about this topic, Michigan psychology professor Ethan Cross wrote this excellent book that specifically talk about some of these, how to shift the narrative from emotion focused to problem focused, and some other strategies that you can decrease the negative chatter inside yourself. So that's a summary of part one. I'm going to pause a minute and maybe ask Barb to share one question I can address.
Gotcha. Thanks so much, Rong. I do want to just remind everybody, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom to enter any questions that you have. So one question is that when we think of this imposter mindset, I'm going to use mindset, not syndrome here. Okay, so when we think of that imposter mindset, some of the places where it comes into play is actually when people are looking at applying for new positions. Maybe not so much in the current work that they're doing, but they're looking for that next job opportunity. They want to do something else, and yet they may hesitate and not go for an opportunity because that imposter voice is kind of creeping in saying, but you've never done that, or this part of the job. Can you kind of speak to that? How can, if you're not really in the situation right now, you're looking at these other opportunities, how can you, what are some thoughts on how you can improve your own mindset to open up your possibility for a new position, a new opportunity?
That's an excellent question. Actually, it's related to the second part. So I will, I will address this because I do have a solution for that. For now, I just want to say, I am all too familiar with these thoughts and feelings, and I think a lot of times they do inhibit us from taking on opportunities, whether it's a promotion you're going for. What we hear a lot from our participants is, there is an award that you just don't think you're deserving of it. I want to quickly share my experience. So as Barb said at the beginning, I am currently one of the editors for Psychological Bulletin, one of the top journal. I received the nomination to be an editor when I was a system professor, and this was not usual. Usually people who are more senior receive these prestigious positions. And I seriously doubted myself. I seriously doubted whether, I should be taking these positions. And I suspect that a lot of you have faced these situations before. I've doubted my deservedness for some awards that I have received. So let's jump into the second part, and I can share some strategies to deal with this. All right, so the motivational nature of imposter experience. What do I mean by this is that a lot of times when we use the phrases like, I need to stop these imposter feelings and thoughts, or I want to conquer imposter syndrome, what we are implying is this is an entirely negative experience that, that needs to be get rid of. That's not entirely true, because imposter feelings can be fire that burns us down, but it can also be fuel to motivate us. So from our research and from a lot of other research, we see that there are actually 3 types of effects from the imposter experience. There is this demotivating effect, right? So because the signature emotions that comes with imposter experience is fear and anxiety, some people become paralyzed because they're experiencing so much anxiety and so much fear that they don't want people to find out they're incompetent, which is totally irrational. They cannot do anything. They also experience withdrawal, which is what Barb just talked about. In that, they do not take on promotion opportunities, they do not take risks, they do not seek new and unfamiliar responsibilities, for the fear that it's going to trigger the imposter thoughts and feeling. Some people, these are in extreme cases, we do not see a lot, but some people even engage in self-handicapping behaviors at work. So these are, I made it not happen, right? Like, it's not that I failed at this task, but I personally made it not happen, which is definitely not great for our career advancement. But there is also this over-motivating effect of the imposter experience, which we have seen more in talking to our participants. What I mean by that is because there is this fear that I'm not as competent as people thought I am. A lot of people's coping strategy is just to work more. And that leads to this overworking and a lot of stress and burnout, and still you're buried in this anxiety, constantly fear how other people would judge you. However, there is this middle ground. It's not easy to find, but having imposter thoughts and feeling, as we have learned from our research, can have this motivating effect. It leads to more effort at work without being overworking and burnout. It leads to a greater mastery of job knowledge and job task. And actually, there's research showing that they lead to better interpersonal performance. So there is a study with physicians, and they found that physicians who have imposter feelings and thoughts but are not drowned in their imposter feelings and thoughts, they actually demonstrate higher interpersonal performance because they pay more attention to what their patients has to say, and they actually receive higher ratings from their patients. So how do we find this balance, right? So the trick really is, how do we avoid this demotivating effect of the imposter syndrome, and how do we avoid being overworking and burnout? How do we, find this middle ground, this equilibrium? So here is my my suggestion, which will address Barb's question earlier. I offer 2 things: looking outward and looking inward. They're not contradictory. Let me explain. The most important thing we can do in this situation is seeking external feedback. And I want to share with you a personal story from one of the participants in my the executive education class earlier this year in January. After my session, my 4-hour session on this topic, one of the participants reached out to me and shared her personal experience. About a decade ago, both she and her father went back to graduate school, after having had work experience. And that proved to be very difficult and very challenging for her. She was experiencing intense imposter feelings and thoughts. And she was overworking. She felt burnout. She felt stressed out. And she's seriously considering quitting. And she was talking to her father. And the advice, what her father said was almost perfectly aligned with the advice that I'm going to give you today. He said, it's up to them to tell me that I need to quit. It's not up to me to make that decision. And this is the same for everything else, for the promotion, for the award, for the next opportunity that you feel like is too much risk for you. That this new and unfamiliar responsibility that takes you to the next level, it's really not up to you. And the reason why shifting this mindset is going to help us reduce our imposter feelings and thoughts is because a lot of times these negative consequences, especially the demotivating effect, comes from us being in our own head. We are trying to evaluate ourselves and we're having these irrational beliefs about our skills and competencies and abilities. But how are you going to address these irrational beliefs just by yourself? They're irrational because you're in your own head. So the best way to address it is by seeking external feedback. And I can share that, I'm eternally grateful that when I received the nomination to be an editor of this top journal in the nation, I was having serious self-doubt. I don't think I'm deserving of it. I think it was a mistake that they reached out to a young professor so early in her career. I talked to Dean Amy Krista Brown, who is one of my close mentors in the college. I talked to my department head at the time, Dr. Amy Colbert, and I talked to another senior colleague. And the advice they offered for me is to try that, right? And I have a lot of similar experience of being nominated for an award that I don't think I'm deserving. And the advice, again, they gave to me is, it's not up to you to say that you are not deserving. We can nominate you and we'll see what happens. And a lot of times I received the award. So it's really important for a lot of us to get out of our head, looking outward, identifying trusted resources that can give you helpful feedback. And that may be supervisors who are familiar with your performance. And that may be, mentors who knows the ins and outs in the organization, knows what it takes to be successful. And again, it's important to have problem-focused rather than emotion-focused conversation with this person you're seeking feedback from. I cannot stress, the importance of having a mentor in organization. But a lot of people are using their mentors wrong. When I say that, what I meant is a lot of us, including myself, tend to seek emotional support from mentors. However, research has shown that emotional support from mentors is not super effective for the career advancement of people in organizations. What's going to be helpful is specific, constructive, and actionable advice, for example, about where you can improve in your performance. What are the things you can do? What are the opportunities or risks you can take to take you to the next level? So when you seek external feedback, don't go to your mentor and say, I feel super stressed. I experience a lot of fear and anxiety. That's not, it will make you feel better momentarily, but it's not going to help you with your career success. Instead, have this conversation. I believe that I'm falling short, in these areas. Is that your opinion as well? What is your evaluation of my performance in these area? Or I'm considering this opportunity. Can you please give me candid feedback about my probability for succeeding in this new opportunity, right? Having really problem-focused conversation with mentors and ask for actionable, specific advice. The other meaning of looking outward, so this is the second strategy you can use, is helping others at work. This may be a little counterintuitive. You're like, I am already struggling, okay, with my own imposter experience. And you're asking me, I'm already overworking. I'm already consumed by my fear and anxiety. And you're asking me to help others at work. I need help. Others don't need help. To that, I offer you some research evidence. So this is research that comes from Basima Tufik, who received her PhD from the Wharton School and now is an assistant professor at MIT. She did this in her dissertation to really look at when can imposter thoughts and feelings lead to mastery at work, meaning that you can increase your job knowledge and do better at work. What she found is that the fear of being found out associated with imposter thoughts and feelings is the major obstacle to mastery, to doing well and to stay motivated and to advance in your career. However, helping others is going to help you reduce that fear. It's going to help you inhibit that fear, and that prevent you from getting better at your job. And the reason is that there is a psychological process that if we're in helping others, help us just get out of our head, right? Remember the negative consequences that comes from imposter thoughts and feelings. A lot of times it's because we stay in our head and we have these irrational beliefs. So by going outside, looking outward and helping others, you shift your focus. So you're not experiencing that much of the fear that's inhibiting you from mastering the job task and getting better at the job. My own research also shows this. We have a recent publication about prosocial motivation, where we show that counter to the popular belief that nice guys finish last, having strong pro-social motivation or the desire to help others at work is actually rewarded at workplace. It's associated with higher job performance ratings from supervisors. It's associated with career success. And this is because being pro-social, helping others, looking outward rather than focusing on yourself, helps you accumulate social capital. And that is reciprocated by the coworkers and by the supervisors. So I really encourage you to think differently about how to address imposter feelings. You don't have to struggle alone in your own mind, seeking out outwards. Okay, so what did I mean by looking inward? It's not contradictory. What it means is that a lot of times the negative consequences of imposter thoughts and feelings are due to this tendency to seek external validation, right? We are constantly worrying, how am I going to be judged, right? You're having these fear and anxiety and imposter thoughts and feelings because we're worried about other people's judgment of us, and we have this false belief of how, there is this discrepancy between our competence and other people's evaluation of us. So to address this, it's important to look inward and cultivate intrinsic motivation. So instead of thinking, why am I doing this? I'm doing this to please my supervisor. I'm doing this, I'm overworking, I'm putting in all these hours so that I can receive, higher performance rating from my supervisor. Stop thinking about that. Think about the meaning and purpose that bring you to the job in the first place. And that's going to reduce imposter thoughts and feelings because, it helps us reduce the worries of being judged by others. All right, so that wraps the second part. I'm going to pause a little bit and invite Barb to maybe share another question.
Well, we've had a couple of questions, and some of it actually you have just answered. One specifically about how can we help others, and I think that the slides that you had that talked about, optimizing that feedback, identifying the source, and not looking for the problem focused rather than emotional. I think those are all important for us to think about when we are providing that external feedback. I also want to say it's a great reminder that next week we're going to talk about how you develop those groups of people that you can go to for that honest feedback that can help you improve. So just another plug for our program next week. There are some questions that are about like, how do I get past, like I may realize that I'm saying this to myself, but how can I push past that? And how can I deal, like if I'm in a work situation where one person is frequently kind of providing that feeling of judgment, how can I work past that? How can I recognize that and work past it? Or how can I, it's good to be able to recognize it, but what can I do? It's hard. Any other suggestions on how to move past that emotionally and push yourself forward? Or did I just lead up to your next section?
It does a little bit, but let me answer it quickly. I think it's a great question. The strategies that I talk about are kind of long-term strategies, right? Like shifting the inner conversation. But I think the question was about when you're in the moment, how do I deal with that, right? Or if I'm experiencing this situation. And the key is really to develop a web of people or support you can turn to, because first of all, again, if you're dealing with this alone, it's hard to get past that, right? Because you're going to be in your head, you have all these irrational beliefs. How are you gonna, get rid of it? So we talk about the importance of seeking external feedback and going outward, but not just from one person, because every interpersonal resource you have is limited. So it's important to develop this network. So if it doesn't work for this one person, you turn to your other relationship. So that does lead me to the last part of the presentation, which will be shorter. So hopefully we'll have time for more questions.
Right, we are getting just a little bit tight. So I'm going to give you that time check that we've got about 7 minutes or so.
Yes, thank you. So, what we found is that there are a lot of these. So imposter feeling is relational in that your relationship with other people strongly impact your imposter tendency or impact the onset of imposter thoughts and feelings. These include, for example, childhood relationship with parents, especially parents who are hypercritical and have these perfectionist tendencies and unrealistic high expectations for their kids. I wish I can show this finding to my parents, but who probably are just going to say that I'm finding excuses for my imperfections. And we find that social support, in contrast, help alleviate these imposter thoughts and feelings. So a lot of our participants in the interview study told us that what they do to push past that is to seek support, not from one person. You may have a close friend, you may have a significant other, but it works best when you have a web of resources you can turn to. Specifically at work, having a supportive supervisor is helpful versus a critical supervisor. A lot of times what we're hearing is that having a bad boss or having a boss that really are hypercritical, are just intolerant of mistakes, are having these, really harsh comments is not helpful. But all of this is quite intuitive, right? What I want to share, and I saw some questions in Q&A in terms of how to support others. So I want to share what are the things you can say to others, and maybe a little intuitive. We have a few participants sharing their story with us about their perfect boss. So what about let alone those bad bosses who are super critical. What about the perfect boss? We have one participant who shared that in one of her previous jobs that she was in for about 5 years, she had the nicest, perfect boss ever. She was a great leader. She was very considerate, very supportive. She is visionary, and she is also, great at leading actions at work. She also appeared to have the perfect family, and she's always supportive, and she always encourages others along and say, you can do this, you've got this, you can do everything as well. And that participant shared with us that for the entire time she was working with this perfect boss, she was experiencing intense imposter thoughts and feelings. And the very reason is that when you have that perfect person around you, you are exposed to this high standards that you even, either consciously or unconsciously compare yourself to. And that's a typical trigger for imposter feeling. So this is a case where, I talk about a dramatic drop of imposter tendency baseline, is that when she moved to another job, which is more challenging, which comes with a lot of unfamiliar responsibilities, she actually felt alive. She didn't have these imposter thoughts and feelings anymore because she was not comparing herself to her perfect boss. And this incident really changed how my mentoring relationship with my graduate students, especially female graduate students, because before I learned about this research, my thoughts are that I need to model perfection, right? I need to show that women can achieve everything. I need to demonstrate to my female graduate students that I am a great researcher, I'm a great teacher, I'm also a great, in my family domain, I have a 2-year-old daughter, I'm a great mom. But what I learned from my graduate students, who is now a very successful assistant professor at another research university, is that, while it's aspiring for her to hear that or to observe me doing all these things, she felt that it's impossible for her to be me. And so I've changed my approach to mentoring. And if you want to help others who are struggling, I encourage you to take a different approach. Instead of saying, you can do this, you've got this, say something different. Say, it's okay to be imperfect. Here are the occasions where I have failed or I have not done 100%, but that's okay because you can improve. If you have only done 80% on a task this week, it's okay. We can do more next week, right? And try to emphasize this growth by modeling vulnerability and share opportunity for growth rather than model perfection. And we can do this not only for one-on-one mentoring relationship, but also create this culture of psychological safety in teams and organizations as well. This here is a great book from Harvard professor Amy Edmondson, who is a pioneer in studying a culture of psychological safety, which basically means, for us to be successful as an organization and as teams, it's important to not be afraid to make mistakes and take risks. And this is relevant for dealing with imposter feelings as well, because if you want to be perfect, if you're afraid to make mistakes and take risks, you'll never get ahead. So as a leader in organizations, it's important to create this culture of psychological safety, which Google found in one of their projects several years ago to be one of the number one predictor of team success in the entire organization. So here are the things I encourage you all to do after today. Think about the relational resources that you have, develop this web, identify your relational deficits and rely on your relational assets. And also think about, what are the conversations you're going to have, either, to help deal with your imposter thoughts and feelings, or help others to improve their experience. And I just want to end my presentation with a story, which, I think is going to be helpful. So a story told by Neil Gaiman, the English author and screenwriter. He told a story about several years ago, he was invited to this event celebrating people with great accomplishments, artists and scientists and inventors, and all kinds of people. And he experienced intense imposter feelings and thoughts at that event, and he thought he didn't qualify to be there. The second night during the event, so there was a musical entertainment, and he was standing at the back of the room with another older gentleman. They were, talking about a few small things, including their shared first name. And the gentleman said something to the effect of, I just look at all these people and I think, what the heck am I doing here? They've made amazing things. I just went where I was sent. The person who made that comment is none other than Sir Neil Armstrong. And what Neil Gaiman concluded after that event, and I just want to share this quote with everybody. I know our time is tight, but I feel this story is too good, is that, and I felt a little better, because if Neil Armstrong felt like an imposter, maybe everyone did. Maybe there weren't any grow-ups, only people who had worked hard and also got lucky and were slightly out of their depths. All of us doing the best job we could, which is all we can really hope for. So I just want to end by saying that it's okay to be imperfect. It's okay to be out of your depths. It's okay to have these imposter feelings and thoughts, and you can use them to motivate and achieve career success. So thank you very much. I know we're at the end of our time, but happy to stick around and take some questions.
Great, thank you so much, Rong. And then I think your next slide actually has your contact information. So I want to make sure that people know that if you'd like to reach out to her, please do so. I think she can provide some additional perspective. I know we've had one or two questions that have asked about office politics and kind of the challenge of that, those feelings of inferiority when you have somebody who is not being vulnerable, who is kind of overwhelmingly perfect, perhaps, or critical of your work. Any thoughts on how to best overcome that negative input? Like, it's great if you get that positive input. How do you overcome the negative input?
That's a great question. That's also a challenging question. I don't know if any research on the imposter experience tells us how to deal with office politics. Certainly this is something that we hear from our participants, being, these toxic relationships are what drags us down. I don't know if this is a good answer, but you have to offset these relational deficits with relational assets. There's, I don't know if you can, decrease that negative experience, but you can certainly offset that with more positive experience. That's, I think, something that's important to keep in mind. And also keep in mind to develop resources, not just in the work domain, but in the personal domain as well, because that's important. Another thing to remember is helping others at work, because keep in mind, being prosocial, like going outward. So if there's one toxic person in the office, maybe trying to gain social capital from others by helping others out and developing great relationship with others. If everybody is toxic, if the workplace is full of toxic relationships, I don't know, maybe it's time for a career change, and not
exactly.
not be afraid of taking opportunities and seeking out risks. So.
Right. Well, I want to thank you again, Rong, for your help and your insight today. It's been very valuable. I want to remind all of our participants today that this has been recorded, and we will be sending out an email that will have a link to this recording, and that will provide you the opportunity to review those slides, which include a bunch of great resources for you as well. Join us next week where we'll explore all of our different networks that we can develop. When this program ends, you'll actually receive a short survey, and that helps us kind of gauge how we're doing. And it gives you the opportunity to give us some feedback on what you've learned, as well as what else you'd like to see out of our Tippie webinars. So in the meantime, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And as always, go Hawks.
Go Hawks. Thank you, Barb. Thank you,
Yeah, thank
everybody.
you.
Great to have you today.